This podcast is produced by the Fireside Chat Club of Canada.
Hello, and welcome to Canada as I See It. I really wasn't sure if I could get this episode out this week. Even as I finish the prep on it, I'm still not entirely sure it will hit the air on Sunday. If you are hearing this on Sunday, please disregard everything I just said. Just after I got the episode out last week, I installed the last of the updates for the operating system on the computer that processes this program. I updated to Windows 10 on September 4th, 2015. And it had only been available to the public for about 6 weeks at the time, and it was really out of my comfort zone to go do something without intensive research, but jump I did. Windows 10 support window closed on October 14th of this year. I really had no issues with it up until the final update that I initiated Sunday afternoon. It locked me out of my system. My login and password were correct and hadn't been compromised, but the system simply could not find the site to verify it. Well, long story short, I had to break the door down. My data was safe, that didn't worry me, but I had to reset the system. That meant that all programs were erased and would have to be reinstalled. I got the system back on Monday and discovered that while all of the data was in fact still there, it was as if it had gone through a whirlwind. Everything was everywhere. So I'm piecing this together with programs and settings that had to be reset by memory. Let's see how good that memory is, huh? One thing that I do want to get out of the way before I begin today, because this show gonna get dark. The events of this story take place on December 6, 1917. And depending on your tastes, that's a clue, there was one other notable event that took place on that date. Irv Robbins was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Irv was a Canadian-American businessman who co-founded Baskin-Robbins with his brother-in-law, Bert Baskin, in 1945. 98 years prior to my minor setback, in 1917, the First World War was well into its third year. Casualties in the war in Europe were outstripping the number of men who were enlisting. The plan was just not working in Canada. So, on the 20th of September 1917, Prime Minister Robert Borden's government passed the Military Service Act. All male citizens between the ages of 20 and 45 could be conscripted. Halifax was experiencing an economic upswing. You see, that was the new irony in the Great War. Thousands of people were fighting and dying all over the world, yet the supplies that filled those scenarios had to be made and bought somewhere. And Halifax, due to its proximity to the Atlantic Ocean and the battlegrounds of Europe, was the place to get those supplies of food, munitions, and soldiers. It was the perfect place to have all of this activity, as it is a deep water port which did not freeze at all even during those frigid Canadian winters. The actual staging point for all of the ships to do their business was in Bedford Basin, an inland bay that was accessible via a 1,000-foot wide channel, hidden from the fierce waves and weather of the Atlantic Ocean. Rail lines from across the country would feed the port, and groups of ships would load up and be escorted out to the open waters to make their way to the European battlefields. Now, this port was actually a dividing line between two cities in Nova Scotia. On the northeast side is Dartmouth, and on the southwest side is Halifax. In 1914, at the beginning of the war, Halifax's population was 47,109. And really, that was on the low end of the scale for Canada's major cities. Montreal's population, it was the largest in Canada at the time, was over 11 times as much at 540,000. By 1917, the population of Halifax had grown to 65,000, and that's an increase of 38% in 3 years. By comparison, Montreal had grown, but only to 575,000, an increase of only 6%. So, it is safe to say that Halifax was definitely a burgeoning locale. This story actually begins on the 9th of November in New York. The SS Mont Blanc, a 320-foot, that's 97-meter, tramp steamer, one-third the size of the Titanic. It was a seasoned 18-year-old vessel, having just completed a trip from Bordeaux, France. And when I say seasoned, you heard the pause there. I'm really being generous. It was what my father would have described as a bucket of bolts. Poorly maintained through the years and barely able to get up a good head of steam. No more than 8 knots. It was therefore hired as a workhorse vehicle. Point A to point B, to point A to point B, to put. You get the idea. The thing is, just prior to arriving in Halifax in New York, the Mont Blanc was retrofitted with new internal compartments made of wood and fastened with copper nails. The new cargo holds were then filled with 62 tons of gun cotton. That's a gunpowder substitute. 250 tons of TNT, and 2,366 tons of picric acid, also known as 2,4,6-trinitophenol, otherwise a highly explosive compound. So, we have wood, copper, a very good conductor of electricity, and what amounted to 3 kilotons of TNT. That is a fifth of the yield of the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. Oh, and just 'cause, a last-minute addition from the French government, whose ship the Mont Blanc was, 490 barrels of benzol. That is a crude motor fuel made up of coal tar. The ship then made its way up to Halifax. At that time, coming in from the North Atlantic and bound for the same port was the Norwegian whaling ship, the SS Imo. You might ask yourself, how did it get there? What is a whaling vessel doing heading for a wartime supply shipping port? Well, it changed its purpose at the beginning of the war and began transporting humanitarian aid to those who needed it. I'm sure all of the whales and Star Trek 4 fans appreciated that. I'll keep telling this story, but you can sense the irony encroaching. The IMO, it was a larger ship than the Mont Blanc, at 430 feet, just over 130 meters, and it was also the same age, being built in 1899. But it was in even poorer shape than the Mont Blanc, although it could reach speeds double that of the cargo ship. It arrived in Halifax on the 3rd of December, 1917, and berthed in Bedford Basin, where it was loaded up with supplies for the trip overseas. The Mont Blanc arrived in Halifax Harbor on the evening of the 5th of December. Due to its volatile cargo, it was requested to stay anchored for the night just outside of the basin, so that all of the protocols could be enacted. One of those safety protocols, the flying of a flag denoting the carrying of such dangerous supplies, that was known as the Bravo flag. It kind of looks like the old Kmart logo. That might give you an idea. That flag was not in place. Fair enough. It was due to concerns that enemy ships would take advantage of firing on a huge floating bomb. Thursday, December 6, 1917. The SS IMO, eager to leave the harbor and get overseas, they put the pedal to the metal and started heading down the Narrows, that 1,000-foot tunnel that runs between Dartmouth and Halifax. You can find a map of the scene at my website, warpole.ca. That's WHORPOLE.ca. And they were heading down there at a speed of 7 knots, practically the most that the Mont Blanc could manage on its best day. The time was 8:15 a.m. Now, following marine protocol, the ship was on the starboard side of the channel, also known as the right side as you travel. It was then that they encountered another tramp steamer, the SS Clara, heading right toward them on its port side of the channel. So, basically setting up a head-on collision. There was a bunch of horn honking, seriously, there was, and flashing of lights. Not so much, just trying to paint a picture here, before the SS IMO agreed to cross the axis into the center and closer to the wrong side of the channel. You think that would be that. You know, they'd swerve, give each other the finger, and then head back to their lane. Yeah, no. The SS IMO then encountered the Stella Marais, an ex-minesweeper turned tugboat heading northbound toward that channel, right up the middle of the street. She was towing 2 barges and moving at a snail's pace compared to the souped-up IMO. You could say that there was a little bit of argy-bargy between the two. Okay, I'll let myself out. Seriously, before the IMO moved even further to port, so as not to interfere with the Stella Marais towing cables, you see where this is going, right? The Stella Marais continues north toward the channel. Just then, who should come around the corner but the SS Mont Blanc, steaming north on its starboard side of the channel, the correct side. The IMO continued on, signaled that it had no intention of crossing back over to its starboard side. The Mont Blanc, same, but in reverse. Again, back and forth several times. And little did the IMO know that it was playing chicken with what was, at the time, the world's biggest floating bomb. What happened next is almost exactly what would have happened 5 years earlier with the Titanic if the iceberg had an engine. The IMO hits the brakes and begins engaging her reverse engines. The Mont Blanc does the same. Both ships begin to twist into the diagonal in opposing angles, much like a horrific water ballet. They hit, bow to bow. Remember that last-minute addition to Mont Blanc's cargo, the benzol? Yeah. It had been just thrown wherever it would fit with no real reliable method of tying it down. Well, the jolt from the two ships touching noses shook them from their precarious perches, and they all went askew. No worries, actually. The fuel did not ignite. It needed a spark. When ships are moving in water, they cannot stop on a dime. Both of them continued on their courses, on their angular courses, and scraped their sides together, much like the Titanic scraped the iceberg. And there was your spark. The Mont Blanc was set alight. The IMO was pushed toward Dartmouth, the Mont Blanc toward Halifax. Next problem. The fire suppression pump was located in the bow, the front, where the ships hit, and where the fire was. The anchors that could have, at the very least, slow the ship while heading toward the shoreline, yeah, you guessed it, they were in the same place. Third and final option, sink the ship. Unfortunately, that would take 30 minutes to prepare and hours to complete the process. The crew knew that they only had minutes. The words given on both ships: abandon the vessels. The view on shore was like that glass, falling off a table. You knew what was going to happen. You braced yourself for the inevitable, but you were completely helpless to do anything about it. It was the middle of winter, still relatively dark. People were just preparing for their day. Schools were opening later to give custodians time to heat up the boilers, but because people were heading out, they were attracted to the commotion on the shoreline. And like moths to a flame, they began walking toward it. Some tried to render aid to the flaming vessel, while others looked on like they were watching a fireworks show. All of the available vessels in the area attempted to help, including the Stella Marais, who tried to tow the Mont Blanc away from Pier 6, where it had lodged itself. By 9 a.m., it was completely engulfed in flames. Fire trucks on the mainland, including one of the first motorized ones available, tried their best to quell the flames. The crew of the IMO arrived on the shores of Dartmouth and could only watch as they feared how devastating the outcome would be. Only one of those crew members would survive. He had seen a native woman carrying her child and attempting to get a good look at the commotion. Well, this gentleman snatched the child and fled for high ground. The mother gave chase, and all three were spared the devastation that would slowly engulf the harbors. As it was the beginning of the workday, people were coming off shift and others would be starting. One of those men coming off shift was with some pals, and they were hurriedly making their way as far from the conflagration as they could. He told them to go on ahead while he had something quick to do. He was a railway dispatcher for the Canadian Government Railways. He quickly tapped out a message on his telegraph to the number 10 train on its way into the city. The message? Hold up the train. Ammunition ship afire in the harbor, making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys. The train received the message and was able to stop outside of town. He did not survive the explosion. Moments later, the dispatcher's name, Vince Coleman. The strength of the Mont Blanc steel shell helped hold the fire in until about 9:05, when, in less than a blink of an eye, that's 1/15th to 1/10 of a second, the entire explosive contents let loose with a flash that heated the epicenter to over 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The shell of the ship turned into a shrapnel wave, and that was all sent out at 3,400 miles per hour. For context, that's more than twice the speed of a bullet from a standard handgun. Anyone in the immediate vicinity of the ship, including the ships directly fighting the fire, were vaporized. One thing that wasn't vaporized, actually one of two, was one of the two anchors that they could not drop to stop the ship. That one anchor was found in a wooded area outside of Halifax, 4 kilometers away. One of the guns from the ship landed in Dartmouth on the other side of the harbor, over 5 kilometers away. Both of those have monuments close to where each landed. You can check it out in the links pointing to the photos on my website. With an explosion comes the inevitable pressure wave. This explosion created a force of 14 pounds per square inch above ground, throwing some people nearly a kilometer away. The same pressure was felt at the Titanic wreck, but 3 kilometers below the surface of the water. Another example, the USS Tacoma, U.S. warship 80 kilometers offshore, felt that wave and temporarily thought that they were under attack. Even people watching from the assumed safety of their homes, a suspected safe distance away, were blinded by the glass of the windows being blown inward. Finally, the tsunami created by the instant and massive destruction and displacement of the harbor water. 9-meter high, that's 30 feet, waves swept through the cities. The dead and the dying were either thrown ashore or pulled into the harbor to drown. The area of total destruction, again, I'm talking buildings shaved down to their foundations, 3 kilometers in all directions. Again, check out my site for links to show how far inland the devastation spread. 12,000 buildings were destroyed. At that moment, 1,600 people were killed or very close to death. The SS IMO was lifted off the water and dropped on the Dartmouth shore. One crew member of the Mont Blanc survived the blast, but was mortally wounded. And the tug, Stella Marais, you remember that one, right? The ship that wouldn't shift back to the proper side of the channel. 5 people survived. Most of what was on the Mont Blanc, the oily fuel and those newly built wooden cargo walls, had been thrown into the air, and they all rained down for minutes, setting houses and businesses alight. The aftermath was just as devastating to those who may not have even known about the problem in the harbor as they made their breakfast and got ready for school and work. Total death toll, 1,963. 500 of them children. 9,000 were injured, and most with eye injuries. To make matters worse, an Atlantic storm hit the next day, dropping 45 centimeters of snow on the area. Even with that, rescue and relief efforts, even from today's standards, were swift. Ships, trains, and people in town did what they could. Help came from as far away as Moncton, New Brunswick, 270 kilometers away. You got to remember, this is 108 years ago. In the long term, the relief even lasted into the 1970s, over 50 years, to help pay pensions, etc., to those who were affected by family deaths. And the CNIB, the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, was created because of this event, to help those who were affected by eye injuries. Ultimately, the captain and the crew of the SS Mont Blanc were held responsible for the accident, which was really odd, considering she was not the instigator of the wrong way passage through the channel. The charges were eventually dropped due to insufficient evidence. Today, I told a story. Do you want to hear more like this? Fiction or nonfiction? Please let me know. Send me a message at asiseeit@warpole.ca. I cannot tell you what is coming up next week due to the issues that I had over the last few days. Rest assured, though, that I will have something up. I'm just not sure what it is yet. Today's episode was introduced by Bill. Thank you very much, Bill. If you would like to introduce the podcast as Bill did today, please create an audio file of you saying, "This podcast is produced by the Fireside Chat Club of Canada," and you can email that to me at asiseeit@warpole.ca. That's WHORPOLE.ca. Canada, as I See It, is a production of the Fireside Chat Club of Canada. Our theme music that you're listening to now and at the beginning of the podcast is Night Owls by Braden Deal. I would also like to thank Trino X8 from Pixabay for the really cool, ominous background that I used today. Again, What's coming up next week? Well, that's for you and me to find out. We'll see how it goes. I think back, I think I may have jinxed myself by telling you what's coming up in future episodes. This could be the universe telling me to stop doing that. Thank you all so much for listening, and have yourselves a wonderful week.